It wasn't supposed to happen this way. The sun was shining too brightly, the flowers were too perfect, and Alpha Kalen Blackwood was about to make the worst mistake of his life. He stood on the marble dais, dressed in ceremonial black, the weight of 500 years of tradition pressing down on his shoulders. Beside him stood Selene, the woman he was about to crown as Luna of the Shadow Crest Pack. She was breathtaking. Hair like midnight silk, eyes like sharpened sapphires, a smile carved from ice and ambition. She looked like a queen. She was everything the pack elders wanted, everything the alliance with her father's pack demanded, and Kalen felt nothing but a cold, hollow dread. In his arms, his 3-year-old son Leo squirmed. The boy had been quiet all morning, too quiet. His small hands gripped Kalen's tunic tightly, his little face pressed into his father's neck. He hadn't looked at Selene once. The high priestess lifted the ancient Luna crown. Forged in moonlight, blessed by the goddess, it was said to hold a spark of divine will. It had never, in all of history, been rejected. "With this crown, I name you Luna," the priestess intoned, her voice echoing over the silent, gathered pack. "May you lead with wisdom, protect with strength, and love with your whole heart." Kalen reached for it. His hand felt heavy, clumsy. He was going to place it on perfectly styled Selene's head. He was going to bind his life, his son's life, to this woman who looked at his pack and saw only assets and weaknesses. He took a steadying breath. That's when Leo moved. It wasn't a squirm. It was a sudden, powerful lunge, a surge of desperate energy from a child who had finally reached his breaking point. "No, Papa, no!" Leo's small, furious voice cut through the ceremonial silence like a shattering crystal. Before Kalen could react, before anyone could even gasp, Leo's hands shot out. He didn't grab for his father, he grabbed for the crown. His tiny fingers closed around the sacred gold. The high priestess's eyes flew wide in shock. Selene's perfect smile vanished, replaced by a mask of utter fury. "You insolent little—" But her words were lost. With a strength that defied his small body, Leo ripped the crown from the priestess's grasp. He didn't throw it in anger. He flung it away from Selene like it was poison, like it was burning him. Time slowed. The crown spun to the air, a circle of gold catching the cruel sunlight. It arced over the steps of the dais. It tumbled down, clattering against the marble with a sound that was too loud, too final. It rolled and rolled and rolled, past the polished boots of the warriors, past the fine hems of the elders' robes, through a gap in the stunned crowd. And it came to a stop, right at the scuffed, worn shoes of a young woman who had been trying very, very hard to be invisible. Her name was Alara. She was an Omega, a kitchen maid. She had only been allowed to watch because the Alpha himself, in a moment of unexpected kindness, had insisted the serving staff witness history being made. Now, history had crashed at her feet. Her heart stopped. The world narrowed to that circle of gold gleaming against the gray stone, a symbol of everything she could never have, of a world that existed far above her station. Terror, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was going to be blamed. She was going to be punished. This was a disaster. But Leo wasn't finished. While the adult stood frozen in horror, the child acted. He wriggled out of his father's stunned grip, his little feet hitting the marble. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at his father's shocked face or Selene's murderous glare. He had a mission. He pushed through the forest of adult legs, a tiny knight on a desperate quest. He reached the crown, he bent down, his small hands closing around it again, this time with purpose, not rejection. He looked up at Alara, and in his young eyes, she didn't see confusion or mischief. She saw a certainty that stole the breath from her lungs, a knowing. "You," he said, his voice clear and firm, carrying in the dead silence. You are the real Luna. The Moon Lady told me. She told me in my dream. She said to look for the one with kind hands." And before Alara could breathe, before she could protest, before she could even think, Leo Blackwood, heir to the Shadow Crest pack, lifted the Luna crown, and he placed it on her head. It settled into her dark, simply braided hair. It was heavy. It was cold. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then a warmth bloomed from the metal, spreading through her scalp, down her neck. A soft, gentle, golden light began to pulse from the crown, glowing like captured moonlight. It was a light that hadn't been seen for centuries, a light of blessing. A collective gasp tore through the crowd. The high priestess fell to her knees, her hands over her mouth. Warriors reached for weapons they didn't need. Elders clutched their chests. Selene made a sound like a wounded animal. "No, this is an abomination. She is an Omega, a servant. Remove that thing from her filthy head." But her scream was a distant thing to Alara. All she could see was Leo's face smiling up at her with absolute triumph. All she could feel was the crown's warmth and the terrifying, impossible sense of rightness. And Alpha Kalen? He stood on the dais, his world unraveling. He looked from his son's defiant, hopeful face to the Omega girl shining with a light he thought only existed in legends. He looked at Selene, her beauty twisted into something ugly and vicious. 500 years of tradition lay shattered at a kitchen maid's feet. And the only thing that felt true, the only thing that felt real in that moment of chaos, was the quiet, glowing certainty on the face of a 3-year-old boy. The ceremony was over, but the real story was just beginning. The silence after the crown began to glow was a living thing. It was thick, heavy, and louder than any scream. Hundreds of wolves held their breath, their eyes locked on the impossible sight. An Omega in a faded gray dress, wearing the most sacred object in the pack, lit up like a small, defiant star. Alara wanted to vanish. The weight of the crown was nothing compared to the weight of every stare. She saw disgust in some eyes, shock in others, and in the deepest shadows, a flicker of something that might have been hope. But mostly, she saw the fury radiating from Selene like heat from a forge. Alpha Kalen finally moved. He descended the dais steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the unnatural quiet. His expression was unreadable, a mask of granite, but his eyes were storms. They swept over his son, still beaming up at Alara, then settled on her face. She felt pinned by that gaze, seen in a way she'd never been seen before. Not as furniture, not as a servant, but as a person who just shattered his carefully ordered world. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could smell the scent of pine and winter air that clung to him. It was a scent of authority, of the wild, and it made her instincts scream to lower her eyes, to bare her throat, to submit. "Your name." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the full force of his alpha command. It wasn't a request. Her throat was dust. "Ilara," she whispered, then forced more sound. "Ilara, my alpha." "How long have you served this pack, Ilara?" "Since I was a child, Alpha. My parents, they served here before me." She didn't elaborate. Omegas didn't have histories worth mentioning. He studied her, and she saw the calculations happening behind his eyes, the political implications, the broken alliance, the rage of Selene's powerful father, the superstition of the glowing crown warring with the cold reality of protocol. Selene found her voice again, sharp and shrill, cutting through the tension. "Kalen! End this farce. Have her arrested for desecration. That brat has been manipulated. Can't you see? This creature has poisoned your son's mind to get to you." Kalen didn't turn. His eyes remained on Alara. "Has anyone instructed you to speak to my son? To influence him?" The accusation was expected, but it still felt like a blow. "No, Alpha," she said, her voice gaining a shred of strength from sheer desperation for truth.
I wouldn't. I I only met him properly a few days ago. He found me crying in the garden. I was hanging laundry. He gave me a dandelion." It sounded so foolish, so trivial, said aloud in the midst of this catastrophe, a weed offered by a toddler. But Kalen's eyes changed, just a fraction. The storm in them shifted, revealing a glimpse of something wounded, something tired. He looked down at Leo, who had wrapped his small arms around Alara's leg, clinging to her as if she were a lifeline in a turbulent sea. "Papa," Leo said, his voice confident, "she's nice. She listens. She doesn't smell like mean." She doesn't smell like mean. A child's truth, simple and devastating. The high priestess approached, her aged hands trembling as she reached out not to remove the crown, but as if to feel its warmth. "Alpha," she said, her voice filled with awe, "the legends are true. The crown of Ilara chooses only the heart that matches the pack's true need. It hasn't glowed since the founding. This is the goddess's will. We cannot ignore it." "The goddess's will," Celine spat, marching down the steps, her white gown swirling like a small whirlwind. "It's the will of a cunning peasant and a spoiled child. Kalen, think. Your pack will be a laughingstock. No one will respect an alpha led by an omega's whims. My father will withdraw his warriors, his support. You'll be vulnerable." She was right. Every word was a cold, hard truth. Alara knew it. The pack's safety, its standing, its very survival could hinge on this moment. The sensible thing, the alpha thing, would be to remove the crown, apologize to Celine, punish the Omega for her perceived ambition, and gently correct his son. Kalen closed his eyes. For a long moment he stood there, a man caught between the cliff of tradition and the abyss of something unknown. The future of his pack balanced on his next word. He opened his eyes. They went first to Leo, whose trust was absolute, then to Alara, who was trembling, her honey-colored eyes wide with fear, and a dawning horrifying realization that her life would never be the same. He did not look at Celine. "The ceremony is concluded," Kalen announced, his alpha voice rolling over the pack, leaving no room for argument. "The crown has made its choice. The moon goddess has spoken. Celine of the Night Fang pack, your journey here is appreciated, but the alliance as discussed is no longer possible." The gasp this time was seismic. Celine went white, then red with fury. "You reject me? For this?" "I honor the ancient magic of my pack, and I trust my son." He turned to his beta, a stern-faced man named Torin, who had been watching with an inscrutable expression. "Torin, please escort Celine and her retinue to gather their belongings, provide them with every courtesy for their journey home." It was a dismissal, a brutal, public, and irrevocable one. Celine's beautiful face contorted. She looked at Kalen with pure hatred, at Alara with venomous promise, and at Leo with a chilling coldness. "This isn't over, Kalen. You've made an enemy today, and you," she leveled her gaze at Alara, "you will regret the day you dared to look above your station." With that, she turned, her gown sweeping behind her like a wave of wrath, and stormed back toward the pack house, her father and warriors following in her icy wake. The crowd began to murmur, a rising wave of confusion and anxiety. Kalen raised a hand, and silence fell again, heavier than before. "Pack of Shadow Crest, today something unprecedented has happened. We will need time to understand it, to adjust. Go to the feast. Celebrate our pack's strength, not this single moment of chaos. I will address the council tomorrow." It was a command to disperse, to normalize the abnormal. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to break apart, casting backward glances filled with wonder, fear, and suspicion. Finally, it was just them, Kalen, Ilara, Leo, and the high priestess in the suddenly empty courtyard. The crown's glow had gently faded, but its warmth remained. Kaelin crouched down to his son's level. "Leo," he said softly, "why? Why did you do this?" Leo touched the crown on Alara's head, his little finger tracing the metal. "The Moon Lady told me the new mama would have eyes like honey and hands that smell like bread. She said she would be hiding, but I had to find her or you would be sad forever." He looked at his father, his own golden eyes earnest. "And I found her. She's here. You don't have to be sad anymore, Papa."
Kaelin's breath hitched. He looked up at Alara and the mask of the Alpha fell completely. For a fleeting second, she saw the man beneath, a man drowning in grief and duty, a man whose son had just thrown him a rope he didn't know how to grab. He stood. "Alara," he said, her name sounding strange on his tongue. "You will come with me. We have much to discuss." There was no choice. With Leo's hand now firmly in hers, the crown, a permanent, terrifying weight on her head, Alara followed Alpha Kaelin Blackwood into the pack house, leaving the shattered pieces of a royal ceremony behind her. She had no idea what awaited her inside, but one thing was certain. The kitchen, the laundry, the simple, predictable shadows of her old life, they were gone forever. 6 months before the crown flew, Alpha Kaelin Blackwood stood at the window of his study, staring at a pack that was strong, prosperous, and quiet. Too quiet. The silence in the great stone house was the worst kind. It was the silence left behind by a laughter that would never sound again. 3 years. 3 years since his mate, Lyra, had taken her last breath in his arms, leaving behind a squalling, red-faced miracle named Leo. 3 years of moving through the world like a ghost, of leading with a cold, sharp mind because his heart was a locked tomb. He'd kept his promise to her. He loved their son with a ferocity that scared him sometimes. But the second part of her dying wish, to find love again, to give Leo a mother, to give the pack a Luna, that promise had festered, unfulfilled. Every potential mate his counsel suggested was measured against a memory, and every one fell short. They were not Lyra. They would never be Lyra. "You're not looking for a replacement, Kaelin," his beta Torin said from the doorway, his voice a low rumble. Torin had been his friend since they were boys, had stood with him through the war that took Alara's parents, through the famine, through the devastating loss of Lyra. He was the only one who dared speak so bluntly. "You're looking for a ghost, and ghosts make poor Lunas." "The pack needs stability," Kaelin replied, not turning. "An heir needs a mother." "The pack needs a heart," Torin countered, "and Leo needs someone who sees him, not just the future Alpha." Kaelin had no answer. He felt trapped between the rock of his duty and the hard, cold place of his grief. Then Selene Vale arrived. It was a diplomatic visit from the Night Fang pack, our neighbors to the north, a show of solidarity. Her father, Alpha Boros, was a hard man, his pack rich in warriors and iron mines. An alliance would make Shadowcrest impregnable. Selene was not a diplomatic gesture. She was a statement. She walked into the council hall as if she already owned it. Tall, graceful, with hair so black it held blue highlights, and eyes that assessed everything with a swift, calculating intelligence. She was 28, educated, politically astute, and stunning. She bowed to Kaelin with perfect respect, but her gaze held a challenge. "I am what you need," that gaze said. "I am the solution to your problems." The elders were instantly smitten. She spoke their language of borders and treaties and resource management. The warriors respected her crisp analysis of their patrol patterns. Even the dour head cook praised her sophistication of the palate. "She's perfect, Kaelin," Elder Maven whispered after the first dinner, her old eyes bright. "Her bloodline is impeccable. Her mind is sharp. She would be a Luna of strength and strategy." "She looks like a queen," another elder sighed. And she did. On paper, Selene Vale was flawless. She was the logical, brilliant, beautiful answer to every question Kaelin's pack had asked. So why did his wolf stir uneasily in his chest when she was near? Why did a cold knot form in his stomach when she smiled at him, a smile that never seems to touch those sharp sapphire eyes? He dismissed it as his own brokenness, as the guilt of betraying Lyra's memory by even considering another.
He told himself that love was a luxury he'd already spent. Partnership was what remained, respect, a merger of strengths. It could be enough. He began to court her in the formal, political way expected. They walked the borders, discussing defense. They reviewed trade ledgers. They sat through long dinners where she held the table captive with stories of her education and travels. She was fascinating. She was impressive. And Leo, from the very first moment, hated her. The boy, who usually curious and friendly, had hidden behind Kaylin's legs when Celine tried to offer him a sweet. When she reached to pat his head, he had burst into terrified tears. Kaylin had apologized, blaming the shyness of a motherless child. Celine had smiled graciously. Children are creatures of instinct, aren't they? He'll come to understand in time. But she didn't try again. She simply stopped acknowledging Leo unless absolutely necessary. She would suggest he take his meals in the nursery so as not to disrupt council discussions. She would comment on how unstructured his days were, how a future alpha needed discipline from the cradle. "He's 3, Kaylin had said once, a flicker of irritation breaking through his politeness. "And habits form early," Celine replied smoothly. "Softness now creates weakness later. My father raised me on structure. It is why I am fit to stand beside you." The words felt wrong. They felt like ice water down his spine. But the pressure was mounting. Her father, Alpha Boros, began speaking of joining their territories. The council drafted alliance documents. The pack buzzed with excitement about the beautiful, capable Luna who would finally fill the empty space at their alpha's side. Kaylin stood again at his study window 6 months ago, watching Celine in the garden below. She was studying the rose bushes, not admiring their beauty, but examining the thorns, the structure of the supports, assessing, always assessing. Torin came to stand beside him. "She'll be a strong Luna," he said neutrally. "But will she be a good one?" Kaylin asked the question he dared not ask out loud in council. Torin was silent for a long time. "She will be what she is, a strategist, a politician, a queen. The question, my alpha, is whether that is what your pack needs right now, or if it needs someone else." But Kaylin felt the walls closing in. The decision was no longer just his. It was political, economic, strategic. Saying no to Celine meant insulting a powerful ally, risking isolation. Saying yes meant securing their pack's future, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet, lonely peace of his grief. He made the choice he believed an alpha had to make. He called for the goldsmith. He commissioned the ceremonial robes. He announced the Luna ceremony to be held at the next full moon. He looked at his sleeping son that night, at the boy's face so like his mother's. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered, the words feeling hollow even to his own ears. "For your future. You'll understand one day." He did not see the tiny tear that escaped Leo's closed eye and trailed into his pillow. He did not hear the boy's whisper later into the darkness to the stuffed wolf clutched to his chest. "Moon Lady, please, send a real Mala, one who sees me. Papa is choosing wrong." Far away in the dark, warm confines of the pack kitchens, a young Omega named Alara was elbow-deep in soapy water, her back aching, dreaming of nothing more than an extra hour of sleep, completely unaware that a little boy's desperate prayer had just set in motion a chain of events that would collide with her simple, invisible life, and that the moon goddess had indeed been listening. Alara's world was defined by 4 walls, the steamy, bustling walls of the Shadowcrest kitchens. Her life was a rhythm of before-dawn risings and long-after-dark retirings. Her hands were never fully clean, always carrying the scent of yeast, soap, or the metallic tang of polished silver. She was a ghost in the great machine of the pack house, necessary, functional, invisible. She was 22, with memories of parents who were little more than soft, faded impressions of kindness and the scent of herbs. They died when the western border flared with violence, a skirmish that also scarred Alpha Kaylin's back and took too many warriors. As an orphaned Omega, she'd been raised in the communal dormitory by a rotation of weary caretakers. The lessons were simple and brutal. Stay quiet, work hard, expect nothing. Do not draw the eye of an alpha, a beta, or even a high-ranking gamma. Your safety lies in not being seen. Ilara had learned those lessons well. She spoke in soft tones, moved in quiet steps, and kept her honey-colored eyes lowered. Her only friend was the head cook, a gruff but not unkind woman named Agnes, who sometimes sneaked her a sweet roll at the end of a punishing shift. Her joys were small and private. The feel of warm bread dough yielding under her palms, the satisfaction of a stack of perfectly clean plates, the rare hour of weak sunlight in the servants' courtyard. Then the Alpha announced his engagement to the lady from the Night Fang pack, and Ilara's world of quiet toil erupted into chaos. Preparations for the Luna ceremony consumed the pack. Every surface had to shine, every garden had to be flawless. The feast had to be a legendary display of abundance. The Omega staff's workload tripled overnight. Ilara's hands cracked and bled from harsh lye soap. Her feet swelled in her worn shoes. Sleep became a memory. And then Celine Vale moved in. The future Luna moved through the pack house not as a new member, but as a conqueror inspecting her spoils. Her voice, cold and clear, issued a constant stream of commands that trickled down the servant hierarchy like freezing rain. This tapestry is dusty. Clean it again. These roses are wilting. Replace everyone. I want to see my reflection in this floor. Make it happen. Ilara never dealt with her directly. Omegas like her were beneath Celine's notice, but she felt her presence like a drop in temperature. The other servants whispered in terrified huddles, of a young maid reduced to tears for a smudged glass, of a gardener threatened with expulsion for a single imperfect bloom, of Celine's suggestion that the excess Omega population might be relocated for efficiency. Alpha Kalen had apparently refused that suggestion, but the fact it had been made at all sent a chill through the Omega quarters that no kitchen fire could warm. "Mark my words," Agnes muttered one night as they shaped loaves for the next day, the hour approaching midnight. "That one has a heart of mountain ice. She sees us as tools to be used until we break, then replaced. She'll make this pack a cold, hard place." Ilara nodded, too exhausted for words. But inside, a small, dangerous spark flickered. It felt like anger. And Omegas were not allowed to be angry. They endured. Her first real glimpse of the Alpha and his son was an accident, a stolen moment that lodged in her heart like a thorn. She was carrying a basket of clean linens through the upper hallway when she heard laughter. Pure, unfettered, joyful laughter. She peeked around a corner into a sunlit garden room. Alpha Kalen was on his hands and knees, a mighty wolf pretending to be a horse, while little Leo rode on his back, shrieking with delight. The Alpha's face, it was transformed. The stern, imposing leader was gone. In his place was a father, his eyes crinkled with joy, his laughter deep and real as he pretended to book his giggling son. She stood frozen, captivated. Here was the heart of the pack, and it was not in the council chamber. It was here, on a warm, sun-germed rug, in the bond between a grieving man and his motherless boy. Then the temperature dropped. "Really, Kalen, rolling on the floor like a common wolf. What will the servants think?" Celine stood in the doorway, elegant and disapproving. The laughter died. Kalen carefully set Leo down and stood, brushing off his clothes, the mask of the Alpha sliding back into place. Ilara saw the flash of disappointment on Leo's small face before he hid behind his father. "We were playing," Kalen said, his voice carefully neutral. "The Eastern Ridge delegates arrive tomorrow. They'll expect to meet with an Alpha, not a man who smells of boy and carpet. Your time would be better spent reviewing the trade protocols." She didn't even glance at Leo. The boy peeked out at her, his small face a canvas of confusion and fear. Kalen's jaw tightened. He looked down at his son. "Go with Nanny, Leo. Papa has work to do." The light in the boy's eyes went out. He nodded, a tiny, defeated motion, and shuffled past Celine. The woman stepped aside smoothly, avoiding any contact, as if her very presence was a contamination. Ilara pressed herself against the wall, her heart aching. That dangerous spark of anger grew hotter. This woman who couldn't see the preciousness of that moment, who looked at a lonely child as an inconvenience, was going to be their Luna. She hurried away, the image seared in her mind. The laughing father, the joyful child, and the cold shadow that had fallen between them, a shadow named Celine, who was about to become permanent. Elara returned to her kitchen, to her soapy water and her bleeding hands. She was an Omega. This was not her world. These were not her problems. But for the first time, the old lesson, stay quiet, expect nothing, felt like a lie she could no longer swallow. 3 days before the world turned upside down, Elara's carefully maintained invisibility cracked. Agnes, her face pale with the strain of the endless preparations, pulled her aside. The girl who serves the family wing is sick. You're to take the afternoon tea tray to the Alpha. Don't dally, don't speak. Be a shadow, you understand? Elara's stomach clenched. Serving in the family quarters was a rare and nerve-wracking assignment. One wrong move, one clumsy sound, and she could be relegated to the laundry caves forever. She washed her face and hands, smoothed her least faded gray dress, and took the heavy silver tray with trembling fingers. The halls upstairs were wide, quiet, and smelled of beeswax and old stone. Her soft shoes made no sound. She was counting doorways, focusing on her breathing, when she heard it. A soft, heartbroken crying.
It came from a room with the door left slightly ajar. A child's room, scattered with toys, and in the middle of it, curled on the floor, was Leo. He clutched a worn stuffed wolf to his chest, his small shoulders shaking with sobs. "Want Mama," he cried into the toy's fur. "Don't want new Mama. She doesn't like me. She wants me to go away." Every instinct told Elara to run. This was the future Alpha. This was trouble she could not afford. But the sound of his grief was a hook in her soul. She set the tray down silently and knelt at the doorway. "Hello?" she whispered. Leo jerked up, his golden eyes wide and swimming with tears. He scrubbed at his face. "I'm not supposed to talk to servants," he mumbled, the rule recited by rote. "That's a good rule," Elara said gently, though the words tasted bitter. "But I heard you crying. Are you hurt?" He shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "My heart hurts. Papa is going to marry the mean lady, and then he'll love her more 'cause she'll be Luna, and I'll be nobody." The raw pain in his voice shattered her caution. "Oh, little one, that could never be true. Your papa loves you more than anything in this whole world, more than the pack, more than being Alpha. Anyone who can't see how wonderful you are, the problem is with their eyes, not with you." He stared at her, sniffling. "You're nice. What's your name?" "Elara." "Elara," he repeated, testing it. "That's pretty. Do you make the jam cookies?" A startled laugh escaped her. "Sometimes. Those are my favorite." He was quiet for a moment, then held out his stuffed wolf. "This is Fen. He was Mama's. Papa gave him to me. Fen is sad too." Elara reached out and gently touched the toy's ear. "Then maybe you and Fen can be sad together. And maybe you can also remember that there's someone in the kitchens who thinks you are the most important boy in the whole pack." "More important than Papa?" "Different important. Your papa keeps everyone safe, but you'll grow up to be an Alpha who keeps everyone safe and happy. I can tell." Where were these words coming from? She was speaking treason, offering comfort she had no right to give. But his tears were drying, and a tiny, wobbly smile touched his lips. "Elara," he said solemnly, "will you be my friend?" The question was a minefield. Leo, I'm an Omega. I work in the kitchens. We can't really—" "Intersecret friends," he interrupted, his eyes suddenly shrewd. "The mean lady says friends make you weak, so we'll be a secret. Our secret." The plea in his eyes broke her.
This lonely, perceptive child was offering her his trust. How could she refuse? "Okay," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Secret friends." She stayed just a few more minutes, helping him stack some blocks, listening to him chatter, her fear melting under the warmth of his innocent acceptance. Then the sound of approaching adult footsteps sent her fleeing, snatching up her tray and hurrying away, her pulse drumming in her ears. She thought that was the end of it. A moment of kindness, a tiny rebellion, then back to the shadows. But Leo, it seemed, had other plans. He sought her out. In the gardens, he'd appear beside her as she collected herbs. "Hello, secret friend." In the hallways, he'd pop his head out and grin. When she was serving in the dining hall, his eyes would find her and he'd give her a smile meant only for her. She tried to discourage him, to be properly distant, but his persistent, quiet affection was a balm she hadn't known she needed. And then the day before the ceremony, he found her hanging laundry in a secluded courtyard. He ran to her, a yellow dandelion clutched in his fist. "For you, secret friend, because you're nice." And that's when she felt the presence, the powerful, focused awareness that raised the hair on her arms. She turned. Alpha Kalen stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching them. Terror, cold and absolute, washed through her. She dropped into a deep bow, the dandelion hanging limply from her fingers. "You're the Omega from the kitchen, Alara." His voice came, deep and unreadable. "Yes, Alpha." She kept her eyes on the ground. "Leo speaks of you." He walked closer. She felt the sheer power of him, the quiet dominance that filled the space. "My son," Alpha Kalem said slowly, "has been having nightmares. He cries himself to sleep. He's been shrinking ever since I announced the engagement." He looked at Leo, who was now trying to tuck the dandelion into her apron pocket. "And yet, with you, he smiles. He speaks. He gives weeds as if they are royal jewels." Alara said nothing, her throat locked tight. "He misses his mother," Kalen said, more to himself than to her. Then his gaze sharpened on her. "You've shown him a kindness I have failed to provide in my preoccupation. For that, thank you." The words stunned her. An Alpha thanking an Omega? It was unheard of. "Papa," he tugged on Kalen's hand, "will Alara be at the big party tomorrow? I want to see my new clothes." Kalen looked from his son's hopeful face to Alara's terrified one. Something shifted in his expression. A decision. "I will speak to Agnes. You may have a brief respite from your duties to watch the ceremony, so Leo may see a friendly face." He led Leo away, but the boy looked back over his shoulder and waved, his smile like sunrise. Alara stood alone in the courtyard, the discarded dandelion at her feet, the Alpha's unexpected kindness echoing in her mind, and a strange, terrifying premonition fluttering in her chest. Tomorrow was a ceremony. Tomorrow, Celine Vale would become Luna. But as Alara looked at the bright yellow weed, a symbol of resilience growing in the cracks, a treacherous thought whispered, what if tomorrow changes everything? She had no idea how right she was. For in that moment, in his study, Alpha Kalen was staring at the alliance documents, his son's laughter with the kitchen maid echoing in his ears, and feeling the first deep crack in his resolve about the perfect, ice-cold choice he was about to make. The storm was gathering, and at its very eye was not the regal Celine, but a quiet Omega with kind hands and a little boy who believed in secret friends. The walk from the sun-drenched, shattered ceremony to the cool, shadowed interior of the pack house was the longest of Alara's life. The crown was a live thing on her head, its lingering warmth a constant, terrifying reminder. Leo's small, confident hand was clasped in hers, a tether to reality. And ahead of them, Alpha Kalen moved like a man walking to his own execution, his shoulders rigid with the weight of the cataclysm he had just endorsed. They did not go to the grand hall where the feast was laid out. They bypassed the murmuring crowds, the stares that felt like physical touches. Kalen led them to his private study, a room Alara had only ever glimpsed while cleaning the hallway. It was a space of dark wood, leather, and maps, a warrior's den. It smelled overwhelmingly of him, pine, parchment, and power. He closed the door and the outside world muted to a distant hum. For a moment, the three of them stood in a triangle of impossible tension. Kalen turned. He looked at the crown on her head, his expression unreadable. "You can take it off," he said, his voice low. "It's heavy." Her hands flew up, but then she hesitated. Was this a test? If she removed it, would she be rejecting the goddess's sign? Would she be giving him an excuse to undo the impossible? Leo let go of her hand and marched to stand between her and his father. "No, it has to stay. The Moon Lady put it there." His little jaw was set with a defiance that mirrored Kalen's own. A ghost of a smile, pained and weary, touched Kalen's lips. "For now, then," he gestured to a chair. "Sit, Alara, please." She sat, perching on the very edge, feeling the coarse fabric of her dress against the fine leather. She was an ink stain on a priceless document. Kalen didn't take his own chair. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying her. "What happens now is something neither of us chose, but we are here because of a divine sign I cannot ignore, and because of my son's faith, which I will not betray." He took a deep breath. "You will be Luna of Shadowcrest, in name, in the eyes of the pack and the goddess." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Alpha, I cannot. I don't know the first thing." "You will learn," he interrupted, not unkindly, "or we will fail together. But the alternative, removing that crown and pretending this never happened, would shatter something more important than tradition. It would shatter my son's trust in me and in the magic that is the bedrock of this pack." He was right. The choice was no longer between Selene and Alara. It was between honoring a miracle or exposing it as a farce, between upholding his son's belief or crushing it. "Your life changes today. You will move into the Luna's quarters. You will have attendants. You will sit at my right hand in council. You will be seen, listened to, and judged every moment of every day." Each statement was a brick, building a wall around her, a beautiful, gilded cage. "And what is expected of me?" she whispered. "Honesty," he said immediately. "Do not pretend to knowledge you don't have. Ask questions, observe, and care for Leo." His voice softened on his son's name. "That you already do. That is the one thing I am certain of." Leo climbed into her lap, as if to prove his father's point. He nestled against her, his head under her chin, his small body a warm, trusting weight. "See, Papa? She's good at hugs." The simple action, the child's absolute acceptance, seemed to decide something for Kalen. "Torin will escort you to your new rooms. Agnes will send up a meal. Rest. Tomorrow we begin." It was a dismissal. Alara stood, Leo in her arms, feeling unsteady. Kalen reached out, not for her, but to gently cup the back of his son's head. "Be good for Alara, little wolf." "I'm always good." And for the first time, Alara saw a real, fleeting smile on Kalen's face. Torin was waiting outside the door. The beta's stern face gave nothing away as he led her through the labyrinthine halls to a wing she had never entered. The Luna suite was not a room. It was a small world of its own. A sitting room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a bed bigger than her old dormitory cot, a bathing chamber with actual running water. The windows looked out over the mountains, not the kitchen midden. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "The Alpha has ordered a guard on this door," Torin said, his tone neutral. "For your safety. Selene Vale's departure was not peaceful. Her father made threats. Until the situation stabilizes, you are not to walk alone." A guard. Not an honor, but a warden. She was a prisoner of her new status. When he left, she was alone. Leo had been collected by his nanny for supper. Ilara stood in the center of the lavish sitting room, the crown finally removed and placed on a table. It sat there, inert now, a golden accusation. She was the Luna. She had a crown, a suite, a guard, and she had never felt more alone or more in danger in her entire life. Somewhere, in a room down the hall, Calen Blackwood stared at a wall, listening to the echoes of Celine's parting threats and the whispers of his rebellious pack, wondering if he had just saved his son's heart or doomed his entire pack to ruin. And far north, in a chariot storming away from Shadowcrest, Celine Vale wiped the furious tears from her cheeks and made a silent, venomous vow. "This is not over, Ilara. You took what was mine, and I will make you wish you had stayed in your kitchen, where you belong." The game was set, the pieces were in motion, and the Omega Queen was left standing on the board, unsure how to move, knowing that the first move against her was already being plotted in a heart of ice. The first council meeting was a quiet kind of torture. Ilara sat in the high-backed chair to the right of Alpha Kalen's massive seat, the crown once again a cold, familiar weight on her brow. She wore a simple blue dress provided by an unsmiling attendant, finer than anything she'd ever owned, but it felt like a costume. The room was full of faces she only knew by reputation and rank. Elder Maven, who had championed Celine, stared at her with unveiled disapproval. A few of the younger warriors looked curious, even amused. Torin, at Kalen's left, was an impassive statue. Most just watched, their expressions carefully blank, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The topic was border security, reports of increased rogue wolf activity near the Eastern Pass. It was all maps, patrol rotations, supply lines, a language Ilara did not speak. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered to the polished table, praying to be invisible. The Gamma of the Eastern Watch suggests reinforcing the night patrol with a second unit, a grizzled commander was saying. But that would pull warriors from the southern timber harvest. The harvest is critical for winter stores. We cannot spare the bodies. Perhaps we should look to our allies for support. She didn't look at Calen, but the barb was clear. The shattered alliance with Nightfang cost them potential military aid. Kalen's voice was calm, but a thread of steel ran beneath it. "We will not discuss hypothetical allies. We will solve our problems with the strength of our own pack. Commander, draft a rotation that pulls minimally from the harvest. Use the older, experienced warriors for the patrol, the younger ones for labor. Report back tomorrow." It was decisive. It broked no argument. Ilara saw the commander nod, respect in his eyes. This was the Alpha they knew.
Then Calen did something unexpected. He leaned back slightly and said, "Luna Ilara, you have observed our pack's workings from a unique perspective. Do you see any concerns we have overlooked? Any resource, perhaps, we are failing to utilize?" Every eye snapped to her. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her veins. He was throwing her to the wolves. Was this a test? A cruel joke? She opened her mouth, but no sound came. She saw Elder Maven's thin lips curl in a faint, satisfied smirk. See, the peasant is dumbstruck. But then her mind, trained in a different school of survival, latched on to a detail. The older warriors for patrol, the younger for labor. She thought of the laundry caves, the kitchen, the endless hauling and lifting. Her voice, when it came, was softer than a whisper in the vast room. The older Omegas. "What of them?" the commander asked, not unkindly, just confused. She forced herself to continue, to look at Calen, not at the skeptical faces. "You send the older, experienced warriors to the dangerous patrol, because they are wise. They see what younger eyes might miss." She took a shallow breath. "In the kitchens, in the laundries, it is the opposite. The oldest Omegas, with bad backs and tired joints, are given the heaviest, hardest work, the hauling, the scrubbing.
The younger ones do the finer, lighter tasks. It seems inefficient and cruel. The older ones have wisdom too. They know the patterns of the house. They see waste. They notice when supplies are dwindling long before a ledger shows it, but they are too exhausted to speak of it. The silence this time was different. It wasn't scornful, it was startled. No one had ever considered the productivity of Omegas. They were simply there. Kaylin's gaze was intense, focused solely on her. You are suggesting we reassign Omega duties based on capability, not just tradition. I suppose I am, her face heating. An Omega with a keen eye for detail might better serve checking stores than hauling water. One with strong arms might be better in the wash than fine sewing. It seems a waste not to use everyone's strengths. She trailed off, certain she had overstepped. Torin spoke first, his deep voice thoughtful. It is a logistical point. Maximizing efficiency in the domestic sphere frees resources elsewhere, and it costs nothing to implement. Elder Maven sniffed. We are discussing border security, not laundry management. A pack's strength starts in its home, Kaylin said, quietly, his eyes still on Alara. There was a new light in them, of reassessment. A content, well-utilized pack is a strong pack. The Luna's point is noted and has merit. Torin, work with the head of household to review Omega assignments. Consider aptitude, not just age. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was a ripple, a tiny crack in the monolithic way things had always been done. Because of her. The meeting moved on, but the atmosphere had shifted. The glances thrown her way were less dismissive, more curious. She had not spoken of battle tactics or trade agreements. She had spoken of what she knew, people, labor, the hidden mechanics of the pack, and the Alpha had listened. After the council was dismissed, Kaylin asked her to stay. When they were alone, he didn't speak for a moment, just looked out the window. That was well done, he said finally. You didn't try to be what you're not. You spoke from your knowledge. That is the kind of leadership this pack has been missing. It was only about laundry, she murmured, embarrassed. It was about seeing value where others see none, he corrected. It was about wisdom. Do not underestimate it. He turned to her. The pack is divided. Some see you as a blessing, others as a harbinger of weakness. Every day will be a battle for their respect. But today, you began to fight it the right way. He left her then with those words echoing in her mind. She walked back to her rooms, the crown feeling a little less like a shackle and a little more like a tool, a responsibility. That night, as she tried to sleep in the vast, lonely bed, she heard the first of the whispers through her door, where the guards were changed. It was 2 young warriors, their voices low. Glowing crown or not, she's still an Omega. How can we expect her to stand with the Alpha when the Night Fang pack comes knocking? And they will. Did you see her in council? She's got a quiet spine, that one. And the boy loves her. The Alpha trusts his son's instinct more than any of us. Instinct won't stop an arrow. We need strength, not kindness. The voices faded. Ilara lay in the dark, the words etching themselves into her heart. They were right. A kind heart and a glowing crown wouldn't protect anyone from the storm Celine had promised. She had to become more than what she was, not just for herself, but for Leo, for Kaylin, who had gambled everything on a sign, and the pack whose fate was now inextricably tied to hers. The battle for respect had begun, and the first skirmish, fought with words about laundry, was won. But the war, she knew, was still to come, and the enemy was not at the gates. It was in the whispers of her own people. A week after the ceremony, the first tangible threat arrived, not in the form of warriors, but of parchment and wax. A formal missive from Alpha Boros of the Night Fang pack lay on Kaylin's desk. Torin read it aloud in the council, his voice flat. It cited the grave insult to his daughter and his house, the mockery of ancient traditions. It declared the alliance null and void, and it contained a thinly veiled warning. Shadow Crest would soon find itself isolated, its trade routes re-evaluated by its neighbors, its strength questioned. "He's rallying others to his cause," Torrin concluded, setting the scroll down. A cold dread settled in the room. This was the cost: political isolation, economic pressure. It was the beginning of Celine's revenge. Elder Maven's voice was brittle. "We must send a conciliatory envoy, offer reparations, perhaps a share of the silver from the South Mine." "We will offer nothing," Kalen said, his tone final. "To apologize for the goddess's whittle is to blaspheme. We stand by our Luna. We will weather this storm with the strength we have always had." But the worry in the room was a palpable thing. Ilara felt it pressing on her, a physical weight. She was the reason for this storm. Her hands, still rough from kitchen work, clenched in her lap. After the grim council, Kalen asked her to walk with him on the battlements. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of coming winter. Below, the pack went about its day, a tapestry of ordinary life that felt fragile. "They're afraid," Ilara said quietly, not looking at him.
"They're afraid of change," Kalen corrected, leaning on the stone parapet, "and of a bully who uses threats because he didn't get his way. This is not your burden to carry alone, Ilara. It is mine. I made the choice to uphold the crown's sign. But if you had chosen Celine, there would be no threat." "If I had chosen Celine," he said, his voice dropping, "there would be a different kind of threat, a slow, cold poison in my own house, a son who learned that power matters more than love, a pack that learned to fear its Luna rather than trust her." He turned to face her, the wind tugging at his dark hair. "I've lived with that kind of threat before. After Lyra died, the cold was inside me. I will not invite it back in through the front door, no matter what price it demands." His honesty shocked her. He was speaking not as her alpha, but as a man, a lonely, grieving man who saw in her not a solution, but perhaps a different path. "What do we do?" she asked. "We endure. We grow stronger. We show them that the heart of this pack is not for sale and not so easily broken." He paused. "And you, Ilara, must be seen, not hiding in council or in your rooms. Be among them. Let them see the woman my son believed in. Let them see you." It was a terrifying assignment, but the next day she began. She didn't go to the warrior's yard or the elder's hall. She went to the places she knew. She visited the kitchens. Agnes nearly dropped a pot, her eyes wide. But Ilara didn't give orders. She asked about the supply of flour for the winter, listening intently as Agnes spoke of a blight in the southern grain. She rolled up her sleeves and helped knead a batch of dough, her hands falling into the old familiar rhythm. The tense silence broke into murmurs, then into tentative conversation. She walked to the Omega quarters, her guard a silent shadow. The communal rooms were clean but sparse, the air smelling of damp wool and tired bodies. The Omegas there froze, bowing deeply, fear in their eyes. "Please don't," Ilara said, her voice gentle. "I am no different than I was a month ago." She asked an older woman about the ache in her hands, suggesting the healers might have a salve. She praised a young girl's neatly mended cloak. Small things, human things. She spent hours in the nursery where Leo held court. She didn't just play with him. She listened to the other mothers, helped settle disputes between toddlers, admired wooden swords and clumsily painted pictures. She was simply there, present. The change didn't happen overnight, but the whispers began to shift. She kneaded bread with Agnes. Her hands knew the work. She remembered my son's name. She asked about the draft in the weaving room. No one ever asked that before. She was not a strategist, she was not a warrior, but she was a noticer, and in a world where Omegas and children and small domestic details were routinely overlooked, being noticed felt remarkably like being valued. One evening, as she returned to her rooms, she found a small woven basket outside her door. Inside were a few perfect apples, a jar of honey, and a sprig of lavender. No note, a gift from the shadows, from her people. It was the first time she felt a flicker of something other than fear or duty. It felt like a fragile, budding connection.
That same night, Kalen found her in the library trying to decipher a basic history of the pack. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. The sentries report less grumbling in the lower quarters, more curiosity. She looked up. They brought me apples. A genuine smile, small but real, touched his lips. Apples are a good sign. He entered, picking up the book she struggled with. This is dry as dust. No wonder you look pained. History isn't just dates and battles. It's stories, the why behind the what. He sat across from her. Why do you think the first Alpha of Shadowcrest built his stronghold here in this cold mountain pass? She thought of the view from the battlements, the strategic vantage. For defense? Partly, but the old tales say his mate loved the way the moonlight turned the snow to silver on the peaks. He built it here for her, for a moment of beauty. He closed the book. That is also our history, not just strength but love, not just survival but beauty. That is what you bring to this pack, Ilara. You remind us of the why. He left her with that thought, a new lens through which to see her place. She was not just filling a role, she was adding a color to the tapestry that had long been missing. But in the quiet of the night, as she treasured the gift of apples and Kalen's unexpected lesson, a report landed on Torin's desk from a scout far to the north. Night Fang is amassing its warriors, not for a direct assault, for a training exercise along our shared border. Alpha Boros is in frequent communication with the Swift River Pack. Their combined forces would outnumber our eastern defenses by 3-1. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already on the march. The news of the troop movements spread through the pack like a fever. Fear, which had been a quiet murmur, became a loud, discordant hum. The market square buzzed with anxious gossip. Mothers kept their pups closer. Warriors checked and rechecked their gear, their faces grim. In the council, the atmosphere was tense enough to spark. They are testing us. Gamma Arlan, commander of the Eastern Forces, slammed a fist on the map. A training exercise at our doorstep? It's a provocation. We must match their numbers, show strength. And pull every warrior from the northern passes in the southern harvest? Elder Maven shot back, leaving us vulnerable elsewhere? This is exactly what Boros wants, to stretch us thin, to make us desperate. So we do nothing? Let them camp on our border and laugh at us? The argument raged, a cacophony of fear and aggression. Ilara watched Kalen. He sat silent, listening, his eyes on the map, tracing the border with a fingertip. He was like a rock in a raging river, unmoved but absorbing every impact. Finally, he raised a hand. Silence fell, immediate and strained. "We will not be drawn into his game," Kalen said, his voice calm. "He wants us to react, to panic, to deplete ourselves. We will not." He pointed to the map. "We reinforce the eastern border posts, but with defensive tactics, trenches, fallback positions, signal fires. We do not mass for a battle we cannot win head-on. We make our ground a fortress that would cost them too much blood to take." "A defensive stance can look like weakness, Alpha," Arlan argued, but with respect. "True strength," Kalen countered, "is knowing when not to fight. Our strength right now is our unity, our mountains, and our will. We will show him our will is unbreakable, but our teeth are not drawn. Torin, send a message to Stonehold Pack. Remind them of our mutual defense treaty against rogue incursions. Be vague. Let Boros wonder who we are speaking to." It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Instead of reacting to the threat, Kalen was subtly expanding the board, creating doubt in his enemy's mind. Ilara listened, learning. This was the Alpha's mind, strategic, patient, seeing 3 moves ahead where others saw only the immediate clash.
After the council, Kalen was quiet, pensive. She walked with him back to his study. "You are worried," she stated softly. It wasn't a question. "I am responsible for every life in this valley," he said, staring into the cold fireplace. "A wrong move and blood soaks the snow. My pride is not worth a single one of them." "You are not acting from pride," she said. "You are protecting what Leo chose, what the crown chose. That is duty, a different kind of duty." He looked at her, and the weariness in his eyes was so profound it stole her breath. "Sometimes, Alara, The weight of duty is so heavy, I forget what I am fighting for. I see only the battle, not the reason behind it. Without thinking, she stepped closer. Then look at Leo. Look at the pup who brought you a dandelion. You are fighting for his future, for a pack where a child's kindness is valued as much as a warrior's strength. That is worth any weight. His gaze held hers, and for a suspended moment, the alpha and the warrior were gone. It was just a man and a woman standing together in a quiet room, united by a child and an impossible situation. A current passed between them, not of passion, but of profound, shared understanding, a recognition of mutual loneliness, and a tentative, growing respect that was somehow more solid than any grand emotion. The moment broke when a frantic knock came at the door. Leo's nanny, her face pale. "Alpha! Luna! It's Leo! He's gone!" Fear, cold and absolute, replaced everything else. They found him not in the nursery, not in the gardens, but in the armory, a place strictly forbidden. The small boy was struggling to lift a training sword twice his size, tears of frustration streaking his dirty face. "I have to help," he cried when Kaylin scooped him up. "The bad people are coming because of me, because I picked you, Mama Alara. I have to fight them." Alara's heart shattered. Kaylin held his son close, rocking him. "No, little wolf, you do not fight them. That is my job. Your job is to be brave here with Alara, to be our heart while we are the fist. Do you understand?" Leo sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm scared, Papa." "I am too," Kaylin whispered, the admission stark and raw. "But we are scared together, and that makes us strong." Later, with Leo finally asleep between them on the large sofa in Kaylin's study, exhaustion claimed them all. Alara woke with a start in the deep night. She was curled on one end of the sofa, a blanket over her. Leo was a warm lump between her and Kaylin, who slept sitting up, his head tilted back, one hand resting protectively on his son's back. In the dim ember light, she watched them, the mighty alpha, vulnerable in sleep, the brave little boy who had upended a kingdom, her family, a chosen, fractured, beautiful family. This was what she was fighting for, not a title, not a crown, this. As if feeling her gaze, Kaylin's eyes opened. He didn't startle, he just looked at her over their son's head, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. But outside in the cold mountains, the shadows were moving. Scouts reported the training exercise was pushing closer, testing the border markers. A skirmish had broken out between a Night Fang scout and a Shadowcrest patrol. No one was killed, but blood was spilled. The message was clear. Boros was losing patience. The diplomatic siege was ending. The real storm was about to break. And huddled together in the quiet study, the Alpha, the Omega, and the little prince had only each other and the fragile, glowing hope that love and defiance could be stronger than any army. The first snow of winter fell the night the border broke. It was a silent, beautiful invasion, covering the world in a deceptive purity. It did nothing to muffle the sound of the war horn that split the pre-dawn darkness. Alara awoke to its blast, her heart leaping into her throat. Leo, who had been allowed to sleep in her rooms after another nightmare, sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with terror. Outside, the pack house erupted into controlled chaos, boots on stone, shouted orders, the clatter of arms. Kaylin was already gone, having left hours before for the border command post. He had kissed Leo's forehead as he slept, and had paused at Alara's doorway, a silhouette against the torchlight. "Keep him safe," was all he said, his voice a gravelly promise and a plea. Now the battle was here. Torin appeared at her door, his armor on. "Luna, you and the boy are to go to the underground shelter with the other non-combatants. Now." Alara scooped up a trembling Leo. "How bad is it?" Torin's face was grim. "They've overrun the first outpost. Boros isn't just testing now, he's coming for the valley. The pass is holding, but—" He didn't need to finish, but they were outnumbered. The shelter was a cavern deep beneath the pack house, usually used for storage. Now it was crowded with the elderly, the very young, and the terrified. Alara sat on a blanket, Leo clinging to her, his face buried in her neck. She could feel the fear in the room like a thick mist, whimpers, prayers, the silent tears of mothers. An old Omega woman, her hands gnarled with arthritis, shuffled over. It was Marta from the laundry. She placed a chipped cup of water in Alara's hands. "For you, Luna." Her eyes, milky with age, held a surprising steadiness. "The mountain is strong, our Alpha is strong, and now our heart is here with us. We will not break." "Our heart is here with us." The words, from the lowest-ranking pack member to the highest, were a bolt of lightning in the dark. Alara wasn't just a refugee here. She was their Luna, and a Luna did not just hide in fear. She stood up, gently entangling Leo and handing him to a familiar nanny. "I'll be right back, my brave wolf. I need to help." She walked to the center of the cavern. Her voice, when she called for attention, was not loud, but it carried the quiet authority she had been slowly cultivating. "We are safe here. The stone above us has stood for centuries, but our warriors are above, fighting in the cold for us. They need to know we are holding strong here, too." She looked around at the frightened faces. "So we will work. Those who can, gather the blankets, make them neat, organize the water and food stores. The children, let's have them sing. Let's fill this place with the sound of our pack's life, not its fear." It was a simple direction, but it was action. It was purpose. The paralyzing fear began to recede, replaced by a flurry of quiet activity. The children started a simple singing game. The elders began sorting supplies. A sense of stubborn, shared resolve began to warm the cold cavern. Above ground, the battle was a brutal, grinding affair. Kalen's strategy held. The narrow pass was a killing funnel for Boros's larger force. Shadowcrest warriors fought from fortified positions, raining arrows and dropping boulders, but the Nightfang wolves were numerous and driven by their alpha's rage. They inched forward, paying for every foot in blood. Then a new sound rose from behind their lines, not a war cry, but a song. Faint at first, carried on the freezing wind, then clearer. It was the Heart Song, an old pack lullaby, sung to pups for generations. It was sung now by dozens of young, clear voices from the air vents of the underground shelter.
The effect on the Shadowcrest warriors was instantaneous. Shoulders straightened, blows gained new force. They weren't just defending stone and snow, they were defending that. The sound of their children, safe, singing. Kalen, parrying a savage blow from a Nightfang lieutenant, felt a surge of ferocious pride. Alara, this was her doing. She was fighting her battle in the only way she could, and she was winning. But the tactical reality was still dire. A group of Nightfang wolves, led by a massive, scarred brute, had broken through a weak point in the flank. They were headed not for the main force, but around it, toward the pack house itself. Torrin saw it from the watchtower. "Alpha, breach on the western ridge. They're heading for the shelter entrance." Kalen's blood ran cold. He couldn't disengage from the main press. He roared an order, sending a squad to intercept, but he knew they'd be too late. Down in the shelter, the song died abruptly as the sound of clashing steel and snarls echoed down the main tunnel entrance. The single guard at the heavy door shouted a warning before a thunderous impact shook the wood. They were coming in. Panic erupted. Alara stood frozen for a heartbeat, staring at the shuddering door. Then a deep, unnatural calm settled over her. This was her domain. These were her people. "Marta," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "take the children to the far alcove. Everyone else, take up anything you can use as a weapon. Pots, stones, tools, stand behind me." No one questioned her. They moved, a desperate unity forming in the face of annihilation.
Ilara picked up a heavy iron fire poker from a discarded hearth bundle. It was cold and solid in her hand. The door splintered inward. The scarred Night Fang warrior stood in the wreckage, 4 others behind him, their muzzles stained with blood, their eyes glowing with predatory triumph. They scented the fear, the vulnerability. "Look at this," the leader sneered, his voice a guttural growl. "The Omega Queen and her litter of weaklings. A fitting end to your pack's disgrace." He lunged, not for her, but for the cowering children. A mother screamed. Ilara moved. She didn't think. She acted. She stepped directly into his path and brought the iron fire poker down on his extended forearm with all her strength. There was a sickening crack, and the wolf howled in pain and shock, recoiling. He stared at her, incredulous. An Omega had struck him. An Omega was standing her ground, her honey eyes blazing with a fire he'd never seen in a servant. "You will not touch them," Ilara said, her voice low and shaking, but clear. "This is my home. These are my people. You have no place here." For a moment, the brute hesitated, confused by this defiance from the lowest of the low. That moment was all the opening her pack needed. With a collective roar that had nothing to do with wolf power and everything to do with maternal and primal fury, the elders, the mothers, the injured Omegas surged forward. They didn't have claws or training. They had pots, rolling pins, rocks, and sheer, desperate courage. They swarmed the stunned invaders. It was chaotic, brutal, and short. The Night Fang warriors, trained for battle against soldiers, were utterly unprepared for the ferocity of defended hearth and home. The scarred leader, his arm broken, was driven back by a hail of projectiles and the shocking sight of an 80-year-old woman beating him with a broom. As the invaders were pushed back into the tunnel, the Shadow Crest reinforcement squad finally arrived, finishing the job. Silence descended, broken only by heavy breathing and soft sobs. Ilara stood amidst her people, the fire poker still clutched in her hand, her chest heaving. She looked around. No child was hurt. Her people, her pack, had fought with her, and they had held. A Shadow Crest warrior from the reinforcement squad bowed his head to her, deep respect in his eyes. "Luna, the breach is sealed. The Alpha holds the pass." The message from above came an hour later, carried by a bloodied but triumphant messenger. "The Night Fang force is in retreat. Alpha Boros is wounded. The pass is ours." A cheer, weak but heartfelt, went up in the shelter. They had survived, not just the warriors on the wall. The heart of the pack, led by its unexpected Omega Luna, had proven itself to be the fiercest fortress of all. The victory was not without cost. The snow around the eastern pass was stained red. Funeral pyres burned for 3 days, their smoke a grim scar against the winter sky. The pack mourned its dead, and the joy of survival was tempered by grief. But something fundamental had shifted. When Kalen returned from the border, weary to his bones and bearing a fresh scar across his ribs, he did not go first to his study or the council hall. He went to the underground shelter, now emptied of its refugees. He stood in the cavern where the final, desperate stand had happened, seeing the scorch marks, the broken broom, the dented pots still lying where they had fallen. Torin stood beside him, recounting the report from the guards. "They say she stepped in front of the lead warrior. She broke his arm with a fire iron. She told him he had no place here. And then the others followed her. The Omegas, the elders, they drove them back." Kalen closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion so powerful it left him breathless. It wasn't just pride. It was a profound, humbling awe. While he had fought with tooth and strategy, she had fought with heart and raw courage. She had defended the pack's most vulnerable, not from a place of power, but from a place of pure, protective love. He found her in the nursery, not as Luna, but as Ilara. She was on the floor, her dress still stained with soot, helping a group of pups build a fortress out of wooden blocks. Leo was at her side, chattering excitedly about Mama's big fight. The children looked at her not with fear of her title, but with the wide-eyed hero worship reserved for legendary warriors. She looked up and saw him. The calm, fierce mask she'd worn in the shelter fell away, and she saw the exhaustion, the delayed shock, the vulnerability beneath. He held out a hand. She took it, and he pulled her gently to her feet and into his arms. It was not a romantic embrace. It was the clasp of two soldiers who had survived the same terrible battle. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, which smelled of smoke and lavender. She trembled against him, the adrenaline finally bleeding away, and clung to the solid strength of him. "You were magnificent," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "They were my people," she whispered back, as if that explained everything. And to her, it did. That moment, witnessed by the nannies and the children, became the final, unshakable proof for the pack. Their Luna was not a symbol of weakness, but a wellspring of a different, indispensable strength. The rumors of her stand in the shelter spread, growing with each telling, transforming her from the Omega upstart into the heart of Shadow Crest. The council meeting the next week was a different world. Elder Maven stood as they began. Her face was stern, but her eyes held a new light. "Alpha, Luna, the pack has been tested in fire and snow. We have seen that strength comes in many forms. The Luna's courage in defending our young and old has shown us the truth of the crown's choice. I was wrong to doubt. The moon goddess's wisdom is greater than my own." She bowed her head to Ilara. "Shadow Crest is stronger with you as its heart." It was more than an apology. It was an endorsement. One by one, the other skeptical elders and commanders added their voices. The division was healing, not sealed by decree, but by shared blood, shared fear, and shared victory. The external threat, too, had dissolved. The news of Boros's defeat and the shocking tale of how an Omega and the pack's non-combatants had repelled elite warriors spread through the territories. It wasn't a story of military might, but of an unconquerable spirit. The Swift River Pack, reconsidering its alignment with a bully who lost to a hearth defense, sent a new ambassador with gifts of grain and a proposed trade agreement. Stonehold reaffirmed its treaty. Shadowcrest was not isolated. It was respected. Winter deepened, but inside the pack house, a thaw was occurring. Kaelin and Ilara settled into a rhythm that was as comfortable as an old blanket. They shared meals with Leo, who blossomed in the security of their united presence. They worked together, he on strategy and justice, she on the domestic well-being and morale of the pack. They were partners in truth. One evening, after Leo was asleep, they sat before the study fire. The crown sat on a shelf, now just a beautiful object, its magic having settled into the fabric of their lives. "Do you ever wonder," Ilara asked softly, "if the moon goddess will ever, give us a mate bond?" Kaelin looked into the flames. "I used to think that was the only thing that made a true union, the only guarantee." He turned to her, his face soft in the firelight. "But I have learned that a bond chosen every day, built on respect, trust, and the shared love of a child, that is not a lesser thing. It is perhaps a rarer one. It is a covenant, not a compulsion, and I would not trade our covenants for any forced bond in the world." Her heart swelled with a quiet, profound joy. "Neither would I." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a vow. This is enough, Alara. This is more than I ever dreamed I could have again. She smiled, squeezing his hand. It is enough for me too. And in that moment, surrounded by the peaceful silence of a pack at rest, they both knew it was the truth. The love they had was not a raging fire, but a steady, warm hearth, and it was all they needed. 5 years later, the valley of Shadowcrest was a tapestry of spring green and wildflowers. The memory of the siege was a story told to wide-eyed pups, a legend of the time the pack's heart proved stronger than any sword. In a sun-drenched meadow just beyond the pack house, a crowd had gathered again. But there was no tension, no dread, only bright laughter and the scent of blooming lilac. Alpha Kalen, a few more silver threads in his dark hair, but a permanent lightness in his eyes, stood watching the scene with deep contentment. In the center of the meadow, a game of chase was underway. Leading the pack of squealing pups was a boy of 8 with unruly golden brown hair and his father's fearless grin, Leo, and right behind him, her braid flying, her smile radiant, was a little girl named Lyra, for the mother she had never met, but whose portrait she kissed every night. Clinging to Alara's hand, trying to keep up on wobbly legs, was their youngest, a serious-eyed 2-year-old named Kale. Alara, her hair adorned with not a gold crown, but a wreath of fresh-picked daisies made by her daughter, laughed as she scooped up little Kale before he could tumble. Her hands were no longer cracked from lie, but there was a strength in them that spoke of a life fully lived, of holding children, of tending her healing gardens, of clasping her husband's hand. She was Luna in every sense. She had her own council of Omegas and mothers who advised on everything from school lessons to harvest festivals. The pack's strength was now measured not just in warriors, but in the health of its pups, the prosperity of its craftspeople, and the fairness of its laws. Shadowcrest had become a beacon, a pack known for its balance of might and mercy. The Covenant, as the pack had come to call the unique bond between their Alpha and Luna, was celebrated every year on the anniversary of the disrupted ceremony. It was a festival of chosen family, of loyalty beyond tradition. As the children played, Kalen came to stand beside Alara, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, a perfect fit. They watched their children, bound by love, not just blood. "Remember," Kalen murmured in her ear, "when he threw a crown at your feet and started all of this?" Alara laughed, a warm, rich sound. "How can I forget? I thought my life was over." "It was just beginning," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our beginning." Later, as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of peach and gold, the family retreated to their private garden. Leo, ever the protective brick brother, was showing Lyra how to hold a training sword made of wood. Little Kale was asleep in Alara's lap. Kalen brought out a small, polished wooden box. "Leo, come here." Curious, the boy ran over. Kalen opened the box. Inside, on a bed of velvet, lay the Luna crown. It no longer glowed with magical light, but it gleamed with a deep, well-loved polish. "This started our new story," he said. "It chose our family, and one day it will sit on the head of your own Luna, or perhaps be remade into something new for your time, but its meaning will remain. It stands for the heart of the pack, for choosing love over fear and people over power." He looked at Alara, his love for her shining openly in his eyes. "Your mother taught us that." Leo reached out and touched the crown with a reverent finger, no longer the toddler who threw it, but a young boy understanding its weight. "I'm glad I threw it," he said solemnly, then grinned. "Best throw ever." They all laughed. Alara's heart felt so full it might burst. This was her crown now, not the circle of gold in the box, but this moment, this man, these children, this peace. That night, after the children were tucked in bed, Leo with his old stuffed wolf Fen, Lyra with her doll, Kale with his thumb in his mouth, Kaelin and Alara stood on their balcony. The moon was full, a silver coin in the velvety sky, bathing their territory in a gentle light. The moon goddess kept her promise, Alara said softly, just not in the way we expected. She didn't send a bond. She sent a little boy with a dandelion, and that was better. Kaelin pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. She sent me a partner. She sent my children a mother. She sent my pack its heart. I would say she delivered beyond any promise. They stood there in silence, two souls who had been lost and found each other in the most impossible way, woven together by fate, a child's faith, and their own steadfast choice. In the distance, the pack slept safe. In the nursery, their children dreamed sweet dreams. And in the gentle moonlight, the Alpha and his Omega Luna stood together, a testament to a love that was not written in the stars, but built day by day with kindness, courage, and the unshakable belief that sometimes the most royal crowns are not found on thrones, but in the simple, sacred space of home.